What's going on, everyone? Chris back again with a re-upload of What Could Have Been in Wrestling. This is a re-upload of episode 14. YouTube and the WWE didn't like that I used a lot of their audio, so have to do this one again. It got copyrighted. And this one is talking about what could have been if Jerry Lawler was a part of the 2001 ECW WCW invasion. So let's just jump right into it. So again, looking back at Jerry Lawler's time in the WWE and when he left, he did leave in early 2001, early-ish 2001, before WrestleMania 17, and Paul Heyman was the one who took his place. Paul Heyman was the one who talked about how Jerry Lawler walked out after his then wife at the time, Stacey Carter, was released by the WWE, and Heyman even said, to the King's credit, he left with her. So with that, gave Paul Heyman the opportunity to be the color analyst on Raw with Jim Ross, and they just basically tried to pick things up from there, and it was definitely a different dynamic than working with the King. Going into it now, obviously now focusing a little bit later, going into that summer, it was still Paul Heyman and Jim Ross on commentary on Monday nights. So now if we go to the invasion, I really want to talk about, again, what could have been if Jerry Lawler was a part of it. I think things definitely on the ECW side, when they brought that brand in, would change. And I think rather than having him just come back, Jerry Lawler that is, to commentary, I think he would have taken a more active role on the wrestling side of that invasion angle. Now, obviously, like I said, it was originally supposed to be just WCW versus WWE, with Booker T being the main guy for WCW, with Shane McMahon as the quote-unquote owner. So, with that in mind, they did, to give some new life into the invasion when they saw it was starting to flop already very quickly, they brought in, they actually just had a lot of guys from the old ECW brand turn on the WWE in that tag match with Kane and Jericho versus, I believe, Mike Awesome and Lance Storm. And they had all of them attack Kane and Jericho. Paul Heyman then got off commentary, got into the ring, talked about how, people had forgotten about the Tribe of Extreme, and that the invasion had now been taken to the extreme. And then, of course, they kind of ruined that, reuniting later on when they did that 10-on-10 tag, where WCW and WWE had their 5 guys each team up, allegedly to take out ECW, who came through the crowd. And after WWE and WCW fought each other to start the match, WWE Gets Hands was born. So with that in mind, I really think, even though the King wasn't there for that, and I don't think he'd be there for the start of the invasion, I do know the time I think he would have come back. And I think he would have been brought back, because at this point, I know him and the Cat had already divorced by mid-2001, and I think Vince actually could have brought him back in early July of 2001, after the Invasion pay-per-view. Vince came out the night after Stone Cold turned on the WWF at the time, and he reinstated The Rock. And at that point, I think he also could have said, Shane, Paul, Stephanie, I hope you're watching, because I have one more surprise for you. And he said, I want to welcome back Jerry the King Lawler. And I think it would have been a big moment. I think he would have honestly gotten a really big reaction. The reason I say this is because if you go back and watch his return in November of 2001, right after Survivor Series, the crowd reacts in a very big way, and definitely people are happy to see him back. So music hits, and out comes the King to provide commentary. This time, replacing, I think Michael Cole was commentating with Jim Ross at this point before Heyman rejoined to support the Alliance. So I think he could have been, obviously, just like covered the rest of the show. The thing is, I think he would have focused his issues with the Alliance more on the ECW side, as I said. And I think on commentary, he could have told Heyman, look, I've had problems with you for years, and you want to bring back your bingo hall guys to help take down the WWF in this invasion. And he said, well, I'm going to shut you up, and he can probably tell him, and I'll take out any guys from your ECW group that you put in front of me. So I think that's where I said that's where he could have a more active wrestling role during the invasion angle. So with that said, I think a lot of it can be obviously them rehashing a lot of their issues they had going back to 1997. I want to go back to that for a moment because, like I said, they have had, the King and Paul Heyman have had legitimate issues for years and have never liked each other, not in a worked, fake environment, but in reality, because Jerry Lawler has said he did genuinely look at ECW as extremely crappy wrestling. He has that thought that, the goofiness and the hardcore stuff is stupid for wrestling, very similar to the Jim Cornette philosophy, and he thinks it's not real, storytelling and real professional wrestling. In 1997, they did have a couple key things happen. They had the ECW guys actually take over on an episode of Raw. And they invaded, and they had, guys like the Eliminators, John Cronus and Perry Saturn, I think that tag team was. And then they had Tommy Dreamer there, the Dudley Boys, and they also had Taz versus Mikey Whipwreck. I want to focus on that match because during that match, Lawler did take a shot at Taz, and I think he talked about basically his lack of height, calling him a midget, and I know at one point he compared him to the leprechaun on the Lucky Charms box because Taz isn't the tallest guy. And then after the match is concluded, Paul Heyman thanks Vince McMahon, but then after getting off commentary, he runs back at Lawler at the commentator's desk. So you can definitely call back to that, because I think Taz, much like the year before in 2000, would be probably the main foil for Jerry Lawler to have to go through to get to Heyman. Because again, you're not going to have, the higher up, the RVDs and the main event guys really a part of this this kind of angle between Lawler and Heyman. So with that said, also I think you can harken back to their debate they had, and I think that you can honestly make this a more personal feud in terms of promos. And because also in 1997 they did have what they called the Great Debate, and again it was the topics were really, is ECW a real wrestling company? And that's where Lawler went into his tirade saying, does ECW really exist at all? He said, you draw 1,100 morons to see your outlaw show. You just have guys hitting each other over the head with frying pans. And you have guys getting brain damage. And then he turned to Vince, who was at commentary at the time, doing commentary, and said, McMahon, you don't need these guys on your show. And I know, again, Lawler really felt, why are we giving our TV time to these guys? He said, you could just have me yell, fire, fire, and it'll be the equivalent of an ECW show. Paul Heyman definitely fired back, and told the King, the WWF success has nothing to do with you. You are an insignificant piece of this. You're not the reason that you draw 4 million viewers and 25,000 people at your pay-per-views. And then Paul Heyman took another shot at him, because then they started going back and forth personally, where, Lawler first said, you're a 35-year-old man that lives in your mom and dad's basement who fund ECW. And then the King, having I guess you could say, a preference for younger girlfriends than him, much younger girlfriends, then asked the King, how are things going down at the Sandbox in the Seesaw at Louisville, where Jerry Lawler's from. And then, of course, they tease a brawl. The ECW's wrestlers who were there for that segment surround Lawler. No one comes out, and the segment ends. So similar to that, I really think that now that Invasion has happened, we're going into that SummerSlam. We're hitting August now of 2001. Going into that, you can have, obviously, Heyman can be on commentary, taking shots at Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler. And Paul Heyman can talk about how he is the superior commentator and the superior color guy to Lawler, and that this is an upgrade. And as an off-topic thing, I guess, a little off-topic, I know Paul Heyman truly believes that. In 2003, when he was on Off the Record with Mike Landsberg, Landsberg tried to bring up his feud with the King and said that the King had a lot of negative comments towards him. And Heyman just fired back and said, I'm sure he does. If I was him, I'd hate me too, because I did his job, and I was better at it than he was. So, again, it is a more personal feud, which I think are the things that draw interest in wrestling. And before the SummerSlam pay-per-view, you can have, obviously, Lawler come out, call Heyman into the ring, but with that, Taz can attack Lawler from behind and choke him out. And, obviously you can have Heyman on commentary, getting a laugh out of it, and still burying the WWF and burying the King, and probably taking shots at Jim Ross like he did a lot of the time during that angle. So, going into that SummerSlam, you can have what would be a rematch of the previous year's SummerSlam, and again have the King and Taz go at it. I still think you would actually have the King win again in 2001 for the long-term story it would tell. Because, again, I wanted to use Taz as the main foil for the King, because going back to that angle, Taz was pretty much the black sheep of the Alliance in a lot of ways. He, in reality, was the Alliance's whipping boy. And legitimately, there were segments where he would get attacked by the Alliance, and he got whipped by Stone Cold, and he would basically just get humiliated. He would always tease turning on the Alliance because, of how pissed he was and how he was being treated, but he would never follow through with it. So in this case, you can still have him get humiliated for losing to Lawler, and you can have Shane and Booker T blaming him, obviously, for, basically letting the Alliance down. Saying, man, we counted on you. Heyman counted on you. Stephanie, Stephanie was the owner of ECW, could say she counted on you, and you let us down. So with that, you can have Shane and Booker T team up in a handicap match against Taz for the next night on Raw. And then from there forward, you can again have obviously Shane and Booker T beat down Taz and then pin him in the middle of the ring. From there forward, you can have Taz then demand a rematch with Lawler going into that next Raw that next week. and saying that he's going to shut up Lawler, he's going to shut up Jim Ross, and he's still going to represent the alliance. I still think in what you can do there, instead of having them do a full match, you can have Jim Ross act like he's going to get involved, tease involvement, distract Taz, and then the King can roll him up for a quick pin. The King gets, one up on the Alliance, gets one up on Taz and Heyman. And then, now that he's beaten Taz twice, he can tell Paul Heyman he wants him in the ring next, and he wants Paul Heyman to back up his words. Because again, Paul Heyman is the guy, he almost talks the big game, but then when it comes time for him to actually follow through and get physical, that's when he would always have, a guy like a Lesnar or a Big Show or a Roman Reigns there to do his bidding for him. Because again, Paul Heyman would always say, I'm just the wise man, I'm just an advocate, etc. So, now going forward into that fall, as we hit September of 2001, we go into Unforgiven. And from there, you can actually have Jerry Lawler come out with a contract and say, this is for our match, Heyman, me and you, and it's time for you to put up or shut up. Heyman can have the contract, then after, Lawler brings it out, Heyman can then have it in his hand, he's reviewing it. And then, to add a little bit more intrigue into the invasion and give the ECW side a little bit more attention, you can still obviously have Taz be the main foil. Like I said, you can have Taz be the main guy in that invasion storyline of, doing Heyman's bidding. And you can have him act like he was going to side with Lawler in this case. But you can bring out another guy who I think would have issues with Lawler and would actually, especially if Heyman is now going to be involved or hinting at being involved in a more physical angle, have someone provide some commentary for that show and also be on the side of the Alliance. And I'm talking about Joey Styles, who they did bring in 4 years later in 2005. I think you can have him come out, cut, kind of like what he did in 2006, a worked shoot on Jerry Lawler and the WWF at the time. When he did it was in WWE. Talking about, how stupid sports entertainment is and how he's a superior announcer to Lawler and how he's not focused on, stupid things like the puppies and things like that and wants to focus on the wrestling. You can have him slap Jerry Lawler like he did in 2006. And you can have Lawler firing back again, just like he did in 2006, pushing Styles on his ass. And Styles then flips over the chair. And, basically, from there, after he pushes down Styles, you can have again, just like in 2006, when Styles distracted Lawler at ECW One Night Stand 2, you can have, after Lawler is distracted, you can have Taz again putting Lawler in the Taz mission. And again, this would further the angle. This would further the angle between the two, and I really think that it would get good heat for the Alliance, and it would establish Joey Styles as a heel announcer. Because he could then, for the rest of the night, join Jim Ross on commentary, and he can do the color commentating, even though he was more play-by-play. He boasted about how he called matches solo without a color commentator dragging him down, as he said. And I think you can have him, having some bickering with Jim Ross and taking Heyman's role for that show. And going forward after that, you can have Heyman come out, talk about how, basically things, how he's now got Lawler in the rear view. Their past is the past. Lawler is stuck in the past, and he can talk about how Lawler, he's not going to worry about a guy who has never won a title with the WWF. He's only been a champion in his own promotion, USWA, which is true. Lawler's held a ton of titles, just never a WWF one. And he can talk about how it is now going to be the Alliance's time to dominate and take back the WWF title that I know Angle had taken from Stone Cold at that show. So we can move forward now into one. They did hint at Rob Van Dam joining the WWF because he comes out of the limo, and it turns out Vince was in the limo he was in. So he was given the WWF pitch. And you can talk about how Lawler and Van Dam actually have some history. Because in '97, Van Dam was acting as a traitor to the ECW is what I'm trying to say, and he actually wrestled some matches on Raw, while Paul Heyman and Tommy Dreamer were in the audience. You can harken back to that, and you can actually have it where the King is actually maybe even trying to persuade Rob Van Dam to join Team WWF. Like I said, going into No Mercy. But again, you can have, obviously, this time, Tommy Dreamer, who wasn't doing much in that invasion angle himself, outside of the first night when ECW reunited. You can have him come out with Heyman, similar to '97 when they came through the crowd. And at the end of the day, you can have them having a face-off where it really leaves it up to some ambiguity because you didn't know who Rob Van Dam was going to side with for a little bit. So with that in mind, again, because they tried to kind of leave it up in the air for a moment, was Van Dam going to stay with the Alliance or was he going to join the WWF? You can have, like I said, Lawler trying to play back on their history from going back to 1997. And you can still have Taz in the fold as well, trying to further their angle, because Taz still hasn't beaten Lawler cleanly in a one-on-one match. So, from there, like I said, because even though Taz and Lawler had their issues, and they can also go back to their issues, like I said, from '97, besides that pull apart Heyman and Lawler had, you can also reference the pull apart that you can have those things all recounted, so it leaves it up in the air. Is Rob Van Dam with Team WWF? And is he going to side with his old pal, the King? Or is he going to stay with the Alliance? Again, the show ends with Stone Cold retaining the WWF title. He did win it back on that Raw from Kurt Angle when William Regal turned heel. And from there, you can have the Alliance celebrate, obviously, Stone Cold's retaining the title and kind of ending the show with them as the winners for the night. So now we have to move forward, now going into November, when the invasion angle was wrapping up. From there, I actually think you can have Jerry Lawler. He could still be at odds with ECW, but this time, Taz isn't there to do his bidding. And you can have that because Taz can then, he was still the commentator for SmackDown, but he can basically tell Heyman, look, if you want Dreamer to handle this, because you brought him out to face RVD and Lawler before No Mercy, you can go if you seem to have more trust in Tommy Dreamer. So with that in mind, I think you can still obviously have the same lead-in into Survivor Series, where, again, Lawler can call out Paul Heyman and basically tell him, look, you know what, at Survivor Series, it looks like it's all on the line. It's that 5-on-5 elimination match. And he can just tell Heyman, I still want to get my hands on you if this is my last chance to. And then what he can basically tell him is, I'll even go through Dreamer if that's what it takes to get to you. The thing is, I don't think that match happens. I think, again, one more time, similar to what happened with on SmackDown. So now this would actually go on to SmackDown because they didn't have the brand split yet. I don't think that match happens. I think it could just be a pull apart. It can just be a brawl, not an actual match. But I think in this final moment, I actually think the King can finally get his hands on Heyman after having after taking out Dreamer with a kendo stick or anything like that, and he can finally get his hands on Heyman. And I don't even think you need a long beatdown. You can just have Jerry Lawler do one of those trademark Jerry Lawler punches and knock out Heyman, and you can get a reaction out of that. And then, of course, Taz isn't there to back up Heyman this time after Dreamer gets taken out. So again, he's taking the brunt of the blame. And then you can still run back the same angle they did at the SmackDown right before Survivor Series, so that previous Thursday, where Paul Heyman cuts that work shoot promo on Vince, talking about how he doesn't care about Sam Mushnick and Don Owen, but he can talk about how Vince stole his ideas for the Attitude Era, how he, took Hulk Hogan's blood and made Titan Towers, killed Bret Hart's dream and screwed him over. But I was the first one to use hardcore wrestling, and I didn't need attitude to do it, etc. And then he can talk about how Vince has ruined wrestling because of sports entertainment. And from there, you can have him go over, obviously, and degrade Taz, talking about how he was a great wrestler, but now is as Paul Heyman said, now he's a fat, annoying color commentator and not a good one. From there, you can have Taz finally breaking away from the alliance, getting up off the announce table. He gets behind Heyman, gets closer and closer. Because you have Heyman getting choked out. Then, of course, at Survivor Series, the Alliance loses after Kurt Angle turns on the Alliance, and The Rock pins Stone Cold after The Rock bottom. Heyman is then in shock, and he's, out of a job. And then the following night on Raw after Survivor Series, you would still have Heyman getting, carried out by security because he's been fired by Vince. And again, you can have Lawler getting the last laugh, pointing at Heyman like he did, laughing at him on the ramp as he's getting escorted out, and when the King made his real return. So again, to me, that Survivor Series of 2001 is where things would still culminate and end for the Alliance there. This time again with Jerry Lawler involved. And again, his focus not so much on the WCW side, but really hearkening back to his issues with Paul Heyman and really keeping it focused on his issues with them in ECW. So guys, let me know what you think. Again, this is a re-upload of episode 14. I had to redo a lot of it because I can't use the audio I was using from the WWE and using their clips. Again, special thanks, I believe, to K-Rob10 and also Brookie in Brawler. I know that he actually, Brookie in actually is, because the L is an I in his username on YouTube, I think 99. I know they were both interested in having me re-upload this, and this one had gotten some good reviews, so I wanted to get this up again for you guys, and definitely we'll have a new episode as well coming up shortly. I'm not going to reveal the topic, but I definitely have already been working on that. And so, again, comment down below what you think, and if you think Jerry Lawler's impact on the invasion would have garnered a little more interest if they had more focus on the ECW side. Let me know if you think that he would have done something different than really feuding more with Heyman and Taz. Do you think he would have focused more on the WCW side? If you do, let me know your thoughts on that. And don't forget to like and subscribe on the channel. And like I said, comment down below what you want me to talk about in the future. If you have any topics that you want me to talk about, I'm definitely happy to discuss them. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks for the support. Like I said, I'll be back soon with a new episode, and appreciate everyone taking the time to listen. Take care, guys.